All right, guys. So it feels like every single time I go to cover Israel and Gaza, I'm saying to myself, there's no possible way that it could get worse from here. There's no possible way it could get more disturbing than what we've already seen over the last 9, 10 months of this genocide. And yet somehow, every single day, I'm proven wrong. So here's the latest out of Israel. I've covered a number of different stories on this, what I think is fair to call a torture camp in the Negev desert. It's called Sti Timan. I'm sure I'm butchering that name, but you can see it written up there. And at this torture camp, Israel has been bringing kidnapped Palestinians from Gaza, many of whom are confirmed civilians. And they're bringing them there and subjecting them to unimaginable forms of torture, the most horrific shit you could possibly imagine. And we've covered the stories of people who have gone to this camp and have been released back into Gaza with terrible injuries, and some of them have even had to have limbs amputated because of the way that the IDF soldiers have been restricting their arms and their legs. We have seen everything under the sun coming out of this place, just a nightmare situation. And so what's unfolded over the last couple of days is that the IDF, while facing immense amounts of pressure from the International Criminal Court, from the International Court of Justice, from the international community, they basically decided, okay, we have to at least provide people with the perception of accountability for some of our soldiers who are engaging in these egregious war crimes. And so the military police went to this camp to not even arrest and to charge, but just to detain for questioning some of these soldiers who were accused, and this is graphic, guys, but you need to say it, they were accused of anally raping a Palestinian man. And so as they were going to arrest some of these soldiers to bring them in for questioning, there has basically been a full-blown eruption of violence, chaos, a riot, essentially, where soldiers, politicians, and armed civilians have showed up to the camp to defend the rapist IDF soldiers. This is not an exaggeration. Here are some of the details from Haaretz, an Israeli outlet. Storming Sti Timan, far-right lawmakers tried to inject chaos into the Israeli army. They say the turmoil revolves around the perfectly legitimate decision of the military advocate general, Major General Yifat Tomer, to dispatch military police to detain for questioning 9 reservists serving at this Sti Timan detention facility. The reservists, again, are suspected of aggravated abuse and forcible sodomy of a Palestinian arrested in the Gaza Strip. The alleged victim was rushed to the hospital due to his injuries. Videos showing reservist guards at Sti Timan expressing anger at the arrest of their colleagues were swiftly shared on social media. Right-wing politicians announced that they were coming to show support for the detained soldiers and slammed the military advocate general and Chief of Staff Herzl Haveli. Dozens of protesters even broke into the base, and soldiers struggled to expel them. And you can see a video of what this looked like here. I can actually show you guys, a quick little glimpse of what some of this chaos over here looked like. You can see some of the people with Israeli flags storming into this base. So can we just pause on that for a second? How absolutely insane this situation is? Guys, this is not a normal country. This is not a, stable or sustainable society where you have civilians, politicians, soldiers who are in full-blown revolt at the idea that some IDF soldiers would be held accountable for forcible sodomy. It does not get worse than this. It does not get more fucked up than this. There are no words to describe how insane this situation actually is. They continue here. They say, while the procedure that the army undertook is unusual, certainly during wartime, it appears to be justified given the seriousness of the allegations. Hundreds of Palestinians have been held at Sti Timan, including many suspected of being involved in Hamas's October 7th massacre. There are also, again, many who have just been completely innocent civilians who have been subjected to these conditions. They say since the start of the Gaza war, prisoners released from the facility have spoken publicly about the harsh conditions there. A little bit of an understatement. International organizations have written about it as well. Haaretz has reported that close to 30 prisoners from Gaza died at this facility. 30 in just the last 9-10 months, which attracted global attention and demands for an investigation. The Israeli and military justice systems are concerned about entanglements with the international courts. And they say the Team probe is not the only one to roil the IDF recently. On Monday, a video appeared on social media. This is another story I didn't get the chance to cover. It showed troops from the 401st Armored Brigade recording themselves blowing up a water storage facility in Rafah. And part of what they said was that it was done in honor of Shabbat. This is not the first example. This is not even the 100th example. This is probably not even the 1,000th example that I've shown you guys, or that at least I've seen, of Israeli soldiers posting their own war crimes on social media. This is just another example of that. They posted themselves saying, in honor of Shabbat, blowing up a water storage facility. And by the way, this is not the only water storage facility that they've destroyed. They have been intentionally, since October 7th, destroying all civilian infrastructure inside of Gaza, a majority of the buildings inside of Gaza. They have obliterated the education system to the point now where experts are using terms like scholasticide. They have destroyed the healthcare system. They've attacked, again, hospitals, schools, mosques, churches, refugee camps, UN shelters, everything under the sun. And they've also been attacking farmland, and they've also been attacking the sewage system, and they've also been attacking the water infrastructure, to the point now where I don't think they point this out in this article here, but it's at the point now where apparently they're either at risk or there already is a polio outbreak inside of Gaza, something that the international community thought we were moving completely past, that this was something that we had borderline eradicated. And now it's returning because there is no, functional water system for people to get access to reliable, clean drinking water, right? I've shown you the reports of people having to drink seawater or polluted or contaminated water. This is what a genocide looks like, guys. The intentional destruction of a water storage facility. Is that a military strike? Is that, for valid military purposes in any way, shape, or form? No, of course not. It is to inflict collective punishment on the Palestinian people. That is the one and only intention of this kind of thing. And you have IDF soldiers not only doing this, but proudly doing this to the point where they would take videos of themselves in the action. It's unbelievable. They say, in this case too, the military advocate general authorized an investigation by the military police. It has been claimed that the soldiers acted on the authority of their brigade commanders, but that the commanders higher up were unaware of the incident in advance, right? All of these incidents have a common denominator. They all involve suspected war crimes. Those who are alleged to have perpetrated the acts not only endangered themselves, but also damaged the international standing of the army and of Israel, and of course committed ethical violations. And this is another point that I think is important to bring up, which is that not only are these very obvious and blatant war crimes, not only is this obviously causing immense, suffering and death and destruction for the Palestinian people, it's also isolating Israel. Like, this is not, again, a sustainable way of operating as a country. Israel is, I think, already at this point, largely a pariah state. I mean, they effectively have, like, the United States in their corner. And then, some lapdogs for the United States, some Western allies of the United States who are still standing relatively firmly behind them. The rest of the international community is not okay with this kind of behavior, right? And it's at the point now where even some Western European countries are starting to go out of their way to try to hold Israel accountable, joining in, international prosecution attempts, or, even considering sanctioning certain groups within Israel. In other circumstances, they're going out of their way to recognize a Palestinian state against the wishes of the United States and Israel. Like, this is just going to get worse over time. This is not going to last. This whole, the Zionist project is going to self-destruct. That is what we're witnessing right now. And this is just the latest part of it. And it's also important to keep in mind stories like this. The U.S. held off sanctioning this Israeli army unit, I believe it's called the Netzah Yehuda Battalion. Despite evidence of abuses, now its forces are shaping the fight in Gaza. So essentially you have battalions like the Netzah Yehuda Battalion that are so egregious in terms of their human rights record that even the United States was considering sanctioning them. Of course, because we're the US, we didn't sanction them, but we considered sanctioning them, right? And now those battalions that are responsible for, egregious war crimes are now shaping the fight in Gaza. They are largely influential in what Israel has been doing in Gaza, right? And I want to make it clear that when we're talking about this torture camp in Steve Tiemann, like, we can talk about the one example of a man being forcibly sodomized, but you also have to understand, like, this is part and parcel of the strategy. Like, this is not just a couple bad apples. This is not just like a couple IDF soldiers going rogue or something. This is part of the overall baseline for how they have been operating. Now, another reminder here that the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, one of the most, obvious psychopaths in the Israeli government, he actually called a while back, a couple months ago, not just for the torture and the abuse of Palestinian prisoners, but for the execution of prisoners to ease overcrowding in some of Israel's torture camps. This is where we're at, guys. Now, we also have this. So, if you didn't believe me that this was not just a few bad apples, IDF soldiers going rogue, here we have a member of the Knesset directly asking, I can't play the video for you guys because it's obviously not in English, but I'll link it down below if you want to go fact check it. A member of the Knesset, this guy Ahmed, said, to insert a stick in a person's rectum, is that legitimate? And then a member of Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party, another member of the Knesset, Henoch, said yes. He said yes, with an exclamation point here. If he is a Nukhba, meaning like a Hamas militant that they say is responsible for October 7th, everything is legitimate to do to him. So we now have members of the Israeli Knesset, right, their version of Congress, if you will, openly saying that it is okay. It is not only okay, it is justified and good to forcibly sodomize Palestinian prisoners. Does this seem like a government? Does this seem like a country we should be giving billions of dollars in weaponry to? Is this normal? Do people think this is defendable or justifiable in any way, shape, or form? Absolutely unhinged. Absolutely unhinged. Now, we also have this here from Shael Ben Ephraim, who we actually had on Breaking Points earlier today. He's sort of like a liberal Zionist, right? And he said this: Israeli sources are now confirming the horrific CNN and New York Times reports of the conditions in Sde Timan. They include electric shocks, amputations due to bad conditions, severe beatings, surgery without anesthesia, playing loud music until inmates' ears bleed, deaths due to bad sanitary conditions, and systematic torture and sexual abuse. Now, by the way, let's just remind ourselves of how much media attention, how much attention from our politicians the allegations of sexual abuse on October 7th have gotten. This has been a months and months and months long, nonstop topic, nonstop point that pro-Israel people bring up. Well, Hamas, they're brutal savages because they, committed sexual assault on October 7th. Now, keep in mind, we had stories like from the New York Times, Screams Without Words, that was largely debunked. There really, still to this point, has not been any credible evidence whatsoever that has been provided that there was any widespread sexual abuse on October 7th. There were war crimes that were committed. That's 100% factual, but there was no evidence of some widespread campaign of sexual abuse. But the reason I bring this up is because that has gotten months of relentless attention from our media, from our politicians, and yet we actually have real, legitimate evidence of widespread sexual abuse, sexual torture, and other forms of torture as well that the Israelis are doing. Do we get that same coverage from the media? Not only do they not portray it in the same way that they portray Hamas, calling the Israelis or the IDF, brutal savages and all of that, but they don't even talk about it. I have never once seen a mainstream media outlet on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, none of them, not even in print, really. I mean, sometimes you get the occasional one here and there. They're a little bit better than the actual, TV media. But I never see them talk about this. This is just something they completely ignore, which again is like deeply ironic and hypocritical, because if that's your main attack on Hamas, well, you have to also apply the same exact standards to Israel, right? But no, it doesn't matter, because Palestinians have been so thoroughly dehumanized here in the United States that it's not even a thought that crosses their mind, right? Because it's one of our allies, because we're the good guys by definition, right? Now he continues here. He says, sources in the Israeli justice system are saying that the evidence is so clear and the case is so severe that it will be an open and shut case for international courts. This is a horror that will never be forgotten, a permanent stain on the state of Israel, and that he is 100% correct about. I mean, it's basically, I think Crystal made this point earlier, it's like a mix of January 6th and Abu Ghraib, but like Abu Ghraib on steroids somehow. Because I've seen absolutely unimaginable things that have been reported coming out of this torture camp. But as he was pointing out here, it basically got to the point where Israel had to try to decide between this international, ICC and ICJ weight that was bearing down on them versus like, having to hold some of their soldiers even like mildly accountable. They attempted to do so and then basically couldn't do that because their own society rejected the idea of holding their soldiers accountable for brazen war crimes. It's like at this point, it's not even possible for them to solve this internally. It's not possible. Not that they ever had any real intention of, meaningful accountability, but like, I don't even know that it's possible for the state of Israel to hold themselves accountable for any of their crimes, right? And so we continue because as another reminder here, I covered this story months ago at this point. I mean, this came out, I guess it came out like 2 months ago at this point. Here from Euromed Human Rights Monitor. Based on 100 testimonies of released Palestinian detainees from Gaza, Euromed Human Rights Monitor documents 42 different forms of torture and inhumane and degrading treatment in Israeli prisons and detention centers. 42 different kinds of torture. You can see some of them listed here if you want to pause and take a look. I mean, some of the ones we just discussed, unsanitary conditions, things like refusing to let them shower, a long-term deprivation of personal hygiene supplies, attacking them with vicious dogs, threatening to commit crimes against detainees and their family members, forced disappearances, electric shocks, pouring hot liquids on their faces, brutal beatings that shattered teeth and bones, keeping hands and feet tied for prolonged periods of time that, result in amputations in some circumstances, blindfolding them for extended periods of time, willful killing, murder. I mean, everything you could possibly imagine. Spitting and urinating on them, holding naked detainees. I mean, does it get worse than this? I mean, seriously, at this point, like, is it possible to get worse than this? I don't think it is. I mean, this is why people make the comparison to, like, these are kind of the modern day neo-Nazis. I mean, it's not unreasonable to make that kind of comparison. I know people get up in arms when you do that because of the legacy of the Holocaust and all of that. And to some extent, I think that's a valid thing to bring up. But, like, what are you supposed to say to this? How is anybody supposed to spin this into anything remotely approaching reasonable or justifiable? Now, here's where we get to the end, because you're not going to believe this, guys, or actually maybe you will believe this, because it is entirely believable. But apparently, the right-wing Honenu Legal Aid Organization, which represents some Israeli soldiers that are, accused of things like this, and they're representing some of these reservists, they claimed on Monday that its clients acted in self-defense in the incident. Self-defense. They're claiming that forcibly sodomizing somebody is self-defense. So, again, I don't know what you say to that other than, there you go. That's a perfect example of what Israel deems to be self-defense. I mean, that should give you an idea, a picture of what has been happening over the last 9-10 months, when Israel has repeatedly been insisting that everything that they're doing in Gaza is self-defense, right? This is what they mean by that. Self-defense. Jesus Christ, man. And of course, we have U.S. State Department Gul Patel being questioned about all of this. And what was his response? Well, here we go. We had Saeed here asking him a question saying, rape, killing, torture happens regularly in Israeli detention camps. Does that constitute a war crime? And he said, reports are deeply concerning. Deeply concerning. How many times have we heard that? How many times have we heard that since October 7th? 100, 200 times? Deeply concerning. I don't care if you're concerned about it. Do something about it, right? This is the same State Department that has come out with reports saying Israel has not committed any war crimes whatsoever, and any allegations that they have are utterly ridiculous. The International Court of Justice is singling out and attacking Israel unfairly. This is that same State Department. By the way, the same U.S. government that has absolutely no issues whatsoever with calling out Iran for human rights abuses, or China for human rights abuses, or Russia for war crimes in Ukraine. No issue whatsoever with that. But then suddenly when it's Israel, we're deeply concerned. We're deeply concerned. We're going to communicate with our Israeli counterparts and see what happens, see what comes down the chain. Now, Saeed responded, he said, it's a war crime, correct. And Patel responded, I'm not a legal expert. I'm not a legal expert. You would think somewhere in the US State Department, you would have legal experts, right? You would be able to make some sort of a determination as to whether or not brazen torture, right, is a war crime. It's a pretty simple thing to try to figure out, right? It's not really up in the air whether or not torturing people to death and forcibly sodomizing people is a war crime. That's pretty open and shut case. It's about as black and white as you can get under international law. But for the US State Department, there's a little gray area there. We'll have to see what Bibi tells us to say. We're waiting for the script from Israel before I can determine how I want to respond to your question, Saeed. Sorry about that. So this is where we're at, guys. I'm probably going to have another video out either today or tomorrow about another aspect of all of this. Because as this chaos is unfolding inside of Israel, we also have a potential hot war breaking out, a full-blown war, more so than the tit-for-tat we've been seeing over the last number of months, between Israel and Hezbollah, right? There was a recent strike that happened inside of Israel. It killed some people who were playing soccer. Israel has since responded to that. And we'll have to see where it goes from here, because we are not only seeing absolutely horrific crimes coming out of Israel, but we're also on the brink of something that could explode into somehow something way worse and way bigger at the same time.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying